Many families don't see the importance of attending Mass every Sunday. How do we pull them in? Make them feel welcome and keep them coming back. I'm your host, Edward Herrera, and we're talking about creative ways to get more minivans to Mass. I am here with Haley Stewart. Very excited to be here with you today. And Haley Stewart, if you don't know, she knows, but if you don't know, Haley Stewart is a blogger, a podcaster now. Fountains of Carrots, Carrots for Michael Moss is the blog, also an author. And I just feel like when you hear the phrase liturgical living, especially for folks that are millennials and kind of thinking about liturgical living now, her name has to kind of be in that conversation because her work on Carrots for Michael Moss are just great. So it's a pleasure to have you. Very excited to talk with you about liturgical living. And I think some of our audience might not know when we say liturgical living exactly what we mean by that.
Sure.
And so I was hoping that you could maybe start out by sharing a little bit what that is.
Absolutely. So when I think of liturgical living, I think of taking the seasons of the Christian year, Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Lent, Easter, ordinary time, and orienting our daily life towards those seasons in that Christian year so that it's the calendar by which we're living our lives more than, say, the academic calendar or the Hallmark calendar. That it's the calendar we're living our lives by. And it doesn't have to be you've checked off a certain number of things. I think it's more of an attitude where this is how we're counting time by holy time according to the Christian year.
No, I mean, and I think that's a neat kind of a neat way to look at it, an important way to look at it. It was funny. I had the opportunity to hear you give a talk a little bit earlier today, and just really the idea of reorienting our lives to that, and to kind of reorient our lives to holiness, I thought was really just powerful stuff. And I guess when we talk about liturgical living, since we're talking about, okay, how do we welcome families and how do we support families more fully at our parishes? When we talk about liturgical living, why is it important for families? Why does that matter for families?
I think part of it is building up a distinctively Catholic culture, that we have things in common with our fellow Catholics, whether it's Catholics at our parish or Catholics 500 years ago across the world, that we have this common shared Catholic culture, which doesn't mean that we all need to be eating the same thing on the same day or anything like that, but that there's something that we're all oriented towards, that we're celebrating together or are walking through together. For instance, in the US, you don't have to give up meat on Fridays anymore, except during Lent. It's not an obligation. But I think it's cool to do that still, because you can choose something else, but if we're all giving up meat, it's something we're doing together. Yeah. And I think that communal aspect is important and matters to people, as well as the idea that we are just naturally wired for traditions and different rhythms of the year, that God designed us to love and reach out for tradition because it tells us the story of who we are. And so if we're sharing that, the way that we count time with other Catholics in a way that we're all celebrating and observing together, I think that can be really powerful about our identity as children of God and also our identity as Catholics. So it just builds up this shared culture that is really meaningful.
No, I think that's is so important. And I mean, it just it reminds me, and you talked about this a little bit, even kind of our Jewish roots too, in that just that idea of just coming together in those shared celebrations, shared feast together. So important. And I guess what I would ask is, with this, I know that there are certain ways with liturgical living that we could say, okay, well, so we celebrate Christmas, right? And so we celebrate that feast and we celebrate Easter. But could you tell me maybe what are your 5 favorite feast of the year to celebrate, and how do you celebrate them with your family?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start with the one that my family started with, because we're converts.
Okay.
So we converted about 11 years ago. And as we were learning in RCIA, about the liturgical year, we really were hooked by it.
Okay.
And we wanted to start bringing it into our home life as well as when we went to Mass. And so we started RCIA in, say, September of, I guess this was 2008 or 9. And it was right towards the end of September. It was right before the Feast of the Archangels on September the 29th. And so that was the first feast we celebrated as like baby Catholics or almost Catholics. And it was really, I had heard of St. Michael.
Yeah.
But I didn't really know anything about him. I didn't know like the prayer to St. Michael that now all my kids know, So it was this time where it was like catechesis in a way, learning about the archangels, learning about St. Michael, and learning about the way that Christians have celebrated that particular feast throughout history. And so apparently having a goose is how you're supposed to roast a goose, or at least that in the British Isles, that's how they did it. You roasted your goose, and it's kind of harvest time, and we couldn't find any geese at the grocery store, so we roasted a chicken. And then there is a legend, there's like a little rhyme about how the day after Michaelmas, the devil fell from heaven into a pile of blackberries, and then he spit on him because he was so mad, which is such a funny story about like the pettiness of Satan. And so after Michaelmas, you're not supposed to eat blackberries because the devil spits in them, so everybody has blackberries to celebrate Michaelmas, the feast of St. Michael, Michaelmas. And so we had like blackberry cobbler, and we had friends over, and they were like, "Oh, what are you doing?" We're celebrating Michaelmas. We just learned about it, And so it was like a great memory. And now our kids are always like, "Oh, is it almost September 29th? Are we going to have a chicken and roasted?" And so I think it's just special because it was the first one. So that's one that is special for us, but isn't like a huge feast day it's not a holy day of obligation or anything. Although apparently it used to be a few hundred years ago. It was a holy day of obligation. Another one that we really like, it's, as we're recording, it's tomorrow, February 2nd, the Feast of the Presentation, was called Candlemas. And because the candles that were going to be used in the home for prayer were blessed that day. I think it's also a continuation of the end of Epiphany, where Christ is the light of the world, and where Simeon talks about the presentation. So I think that's all connected there. So usually what we do is we make candles, like we'll get beeswax and and dip candles, or go the easy way, you just roll up the sheet of beeswax. That's what we do with little toddlers that we don't want anywhere near the wax. So that's one thing we like to do. For Our Lady of Guadalupe, we usually do carnitas.
Oh, nice.
Which is yummy.
I'm a Texas boy. I'm very excited about that idea. That sounds...
I'm trying to think of which other two would be my favorite. A couple of saints that are special to us. Saint Nicholas is a great saint. So happens, his feast is December 6th, which is during Advent. And we actually give our Christmas gifts to our kids that day, so that it's kind of a fun thing during Advent, and then Christmas Day isn't as much about presents, and we kind of focus on Jesus and other things.
I don't know why you do that. No.
So we do our gifts for the kids that day and tell them stories about St. Nicholas's generosity. Right. There's lots of legends about him giving everything he had to the poor and caring for poor families. So talking about gifts that way. Trying to think of one last one, trying to narrow it down. I think Mardi Gras is one of my
Okay.
favorite. My husband's from New Orleans.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So Mardi Gras the day before Ash Wednesday, last day for a hurrah before Lent starts, and we usually do like Cajun food and a king cake
Nice.
and
Nice.
and all of that. So those are some of our favorites.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think it's fun to hear kind of the different traditions and the way in which you can bring other families into that too. And I was wondering, when we talk about, and it's interesting to me that as a recent convert, you were really taken to this idea of the liturgical year and celebrating kind of this liturgical living, so to speak. Do you think? I mean, how can liturgical living play a role in evangelization?
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that? Because I mean, part of what we're talking about is John Paul II says that families are supposed to be the object and the agent of the new evangelization, right? So those who we're evangelizing and those who we send out. And so how is liturgical living a part of that evangelization effort?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that. One is that it is a catechesis for the family, for the domestic church. But
Yeah.
I mean, as a convert, the Christian year has catechized me in many ways. Like I've learned so
Yeah.
much about the saints and the faith through the seasons and feast days of the Christian year. And I think that children at first, they're going to have kind of a shallow understanding of the Christian
Sure.
year and what those things mean. But every year they're building on that foundation. And it's just, I think, such a natural and beautiful way to pass on the faith to our
Yeah.
children. And then the other piece of that is hospitality then lends itself beautifully to evangelization.
Yeah.
That if you are celebrating the Feast of St. Michael and you happen to have friends over, it's like, oh yeah, we always have a roast chicken because it's the Feast of St. Michael. And you're letting them enter in and have a window into a Catholic family life in a way that's not pushy or feels disingenuous. It's just this is what we do. This is how our family life works and how it's oriented. And we'd love for you to come over and feast with us and enjoy this with us. And I think that that's something that is very attractive to a culture that is often unmoored and has lost touch with traditions. I think that we really long for it. Even like something as, I know it's controversial with Catholics, but say Harry Potter. Like my generation of millennials grew up with Harry Potter and love it. And I think part of it is being part of this kind of the culture of Hogwarts. Where there's this different, we always have this feast, the beginning of the year feast and the Halloween feast. And there's something about it that is attractive to a culture that has lost most of its traditions of significance. And so something as silly as Harry Potter, I think, points us towards a longing that our culture has for rich traditions to be shared.
Yeah, that's great. No, and one thing, when you're talking about inviting families in, right, you mentioned in your talk earlier, particularly about kind of making space in your home. Could you share a little bit more about that with me?
Yeah, so one of the things I talked about earlier was having a family altar, having some kind of sacred space, which doesn't have to be anything extravagant or fancy. It can just be a shelf on a wall or the top of a bookshelf, or it can be very simple, but just a space where you could have candles lit and have a crucifix and have your icons or sacred art, a spot to put your rosaries, and you're walking by it all day. It's part of your home, and it's reminding you in a sensory way of a call to prayer or inspiration of the saints of whose icons are there, and just a space for prayer. And so, like I said, it doesn't have to be anything fancy, but I think it is important for us as sensory human beings. It's great for kids who are sensory, but also it's great for me to walk by every day as I'm walking between rooms and see the family altar.
Nice. And I guess I think the question for me with all of this is, sometimes with liturgical living, particularly the way in which we're talking about it, is if we're a parish, we always want a program, right? It's like, well, but give me, what's the program? Like, what's the program that's going to really help families? And so I guess there's no program. I mean, there's a liturgical year, right? So that's a program.
Right.
But how, like, what advice would you give, or what suggestions would you give as someone who's trying to live out the liturgical year? What would be your desire from your parish community?
Sure.
Like, what would help you to live the liturgical year better?
I think it is helpful when the priest mentions, like, even, it doesn't have to be the whole homily, but like, oh, here's just a real quick snippet of what this day means, which I think is something a lot of priests do naturally. But say it's the Feast of the Presentation, and just to say, like, yeah, traditionally we bless candles this day. If you need me to bless candles after Mass, let me know. I'll be here to bless your candles. You can always, or to let them know the week before, you can bring candles next week. So to just have support from the priest. I think that it's really good to kind of get the ball rolling to empower lay people to take the lead on this and just naturally invite friends over. But I think that something I've seen some parishes do that I think is really effective is during Lent, after Friday, you have Stations of the Cross, then to have a simple soup dinner. You know, everybody might bring a crock pot.
It's very
of
un-Texas.
Soup.
They like a giant fish fry.
Right.
So your husband, right, a giant crawfish feast on a Friday.
Which sounds delicious.
Yeah, yes, it sounds delicious, but not liturgical.
Maybe. Well, it's fish, so it's letter of the law. It is good. But something like that is just a very natural way to bring families together to get to know each other. I think the goal is that lay people are building up community and inviting each other over and inviting people outside of the parish over. I think the question is, how do we get that ball rolling? How do we get it started? I think reminding lay people that they can do that is helpful. But something like having Lenten dinners is a great way to connect people and kind of get people turned towards the seasons of the Christian year, that, hey, like, we're observing this together. I think that feeling when you've gone to Ash Wednesday service, you've got the ashes on your forehead, and you see somebody you don't know, but they've got ashes too, and you're both like, hey you. He was like, yeah, we're doing this together. It's just a great feeling of camaraderie. Like, the goal is holiness, and we're all in this together. And when we get to do these traditions and walk through these seasons together, there's this, like, I don't know, like, urging each other on towards holiness, where it's like, we're doing it, and the saints are cheering for us in heaven, and people have been doing this throughout the history of the church. And it makes it really exciting. But I think getting the ball rolling so that lay people take this on is the goal, and not being so hung up about programming that we forget their real goal, which I understand. Like, it's so easy to want to be like, oh, let's just get a program in. But I was seeing a friend on Twitter was saying that a bunch of kind of young families had just organically created a friend group where they were getting together and celebrating the Christian year together. And the parish said, we want you to stop, because I think it's interfering with the programming
that's not
that we have. We would prefer that instead everybody did our programming. And it's just kind of, missing the forest for the trees, or whatever the phrase is.
But
that's what's happening.
No, it's tough. I think sometimes that we lose sight of what that. Well, but what's the ultimate goal? What's what are we after? And that's heaven. So, well, I guess in terms of a couple of practical things, what are a couple of good resources, right? So whether you're a parent that's hearing this and hearing about liturgical living, or if you're a DRE or someone who works at a parish and you want to kind of pick out a few liturgical feasts, like what are some good resources that you would recommend?
I prefer books to websites just because
Sure.
websites can be overwhelming because it then becomes a rabbit hole of all the different ways you could do a certain thing and then you feel paralyzed. So a couple of great books. One is Kendra Tierney's The Catholic All Year Compendium, which is it's just a huge reference for kind of introduces different seasons and feast days and saints days, and gives some practical ideas for how a normal modern family could observe that. Yeah. And it's very extensive. So I could not do all of the things in that book. I think most families couldn't, but you can definitely pick out some great things. It's a great resource. A book that is just coming out and that I just picked up that's specifically about Lent and Easter. And I'm going to not remember the title, but it's by Father William Saunders. Okay. And it's just coming out. I think it's called like A Holy Lenten Easter or something to that effect. And I just started reading it, which is just really great for
we'll find it. We'll put it in the notes.
Yeah, that would be great. So those are a couple of good ones. But I think also Kendra Tierney's Catholic All Year Compendium will also point you to other resources about specific things.
Now, you and your husband wrote a book, too,
We did.
Right?
We wrote a book.
No self-promotion here.
Well, I feel like Kendra's is so much more extensive than ours. But if you want just more of a bare bones introduction.
Is she like, it's my sense she's like the Martha Stewart, though.
She is. She's a good friend of mine, and we're very different. So I'm always like, I am amazed by we're mere mortals before you, Kendra. So my husband and I wrote an kind of introduction to the liturgical year and with recipes and some reflections on the different seasons. And it's called Feast. And it's on Amazon and also on my website. So you can grab it there.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, and I guess as we're kind of closing out, are there any kind of just I know I asked you a couple of feasts that you kind of like or special within your family. Would you recommend like 3 starting points if someone wants to kind of start trying to live more liturgically or trying to incorporate it into the life of the parish? Are there maybe 3 things that you'd recommend to them?
Sure. One thing that I think is great to do is for each member of the family to either choose like the saint that's their namesake, their name saint, or the saint they have a devotion to, and put that on the calendar and celebrate each of those days. And it doesn't have to be anything extravagant, but just even we're just having ice cream for dinner because it's so-and-so's feast day. Nice. Or it can be something that, it's a Mexican saint and we're going to have tacos, or it's an Italian saint and we're going to have pizza. It can be simple. So I think that's one good thing to do, and kind of putting those on the calendar helps you not feel like I've got to celebrate every saint that's on the calendar, which you just can't do. It would be impossible. So I think that's a good start. I think the seasons of Advent and Lent, because they're so countercultural, I think it really helps we know how to celebrate Christmas, but it's hard for us to slow down for Advent. So just trying to slow down and doing a simple tradition like having an Advent wreath with Advent candles that you're lighting as a family during that season is great. And then really trying to work together as a family to celebrate, to observe Lent. Usually my family will try to pick like, okay, we're gonna pray Stations of the Cross every night. That'll be our prayer. And then we're gonna give up Netflix or whatever it is that we choose together. And then we do something where we make what's called blessing bags. It's like bags that have toothpaste and soap and just different, granola bars. So we have a bunch of the bags in the car. So if we see someone in need, we've got it all ready to go and can just offer it to them. So that's usually one of our Lenten traditions. So just something like that, sitting together as a family and saying, how can we do this together and bounce around ideas. I think it's really helpful when the kids are offering, could we do this? Or what if we gave this up? So they feel like participants in what you're doing. Mm-hmm.
Nice. Well, these are a lot of great ideas that you've given to us today. I really just appreciate the time. I mean, you had a whole retreat that you gave today, and then you're spending time with us this evening to talk a little bit more. So appreciate it, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Minivans to Mass is hosted by Edward Herrera. To listen to more episodes and share your ideas about getting more minivans to Mass, visit www.archvault.org/minivans. Special thanks to Jay Lampart for the editing help, Jack Raybold for the animation in our video, and Catherine Amon for the artwork. This has been a production of the Archdiocese of Baltimore.